The Call of the Breach, Part 1.
Disclaimer: the content presented in this video is purely fictional and intended for entertainment purposes only.
Contact right. I jolted awake at the blaring of my headset speakers, and the hoarse cry of a gunner echoed through them like bells of doom. Dust gritted between my teeth, and the vertebrae in my neck let out a stubborn pop as I swiveled my head to stare out the passenger side window of the semi-truck. In a wave of shadow, dozens of bulky figures lumbered out of the trees a few hundred yards to my right, plowing through the vast expanse of overgrown pasture land. With the autumn sun fading in the cold gray sky, I could barely catch the gleam of unwashed glass, reddish-brown mud caked along dented sheet metal, and rusted steel axles bent at unnatural angles to propel the beasts along on all fours. There were over 20 of them, the herds bigger than last month thanks to the plethora of abandoned scrap that dotted this forgotten stretch of the Appalachian foothills. At the speed they were moving, they would be on us in minutes, Lieutenant? My driver and acting platoon sergeant, 17-year-old Charlie McPherson, gripped the steering wheel of the aged tractor-trailer and eyed the onrushing horde, his face white. "What's the call? Should we try to take a secondary road and run for it?" The slight crack in his voice gave away the sergeant's preferred option, and I couldn't blame him. Like most of the others in my command, Charlie hadn't even seen his 18th birthday yet and spent most of the past several months in the safety of the military zone far to the north. This was the first time our platoon had seen so many anomalies at once, and I could sense the tension and the static over the radio headset. I felt it too, the deep-rooted fear, the surge of icy adrenaline that begged me to flee as fast as the clattering vehicle under my legs would take me. But the others are counting on us, all hands, battle stations. I clicked the radio mic so that my voice carried over the airwaves to the rest of the convoy. "We've got autostalkers on our 3 o'clock. Stay on course, we're punching through." Cries of alarm went up all across the line of vehicles, the signal enough to throw every crew member into action. Diesel engines roared, our speed increased. And the drivers rammed their accelerators to the floor so that black exhaust billowed into the air from each rig. Machine guns opened up from their fortified positions on the trucks, but with a sinking feeling in my chest, I noted how little it did to dissuade the enemy. These mutants were hardy, difficult to bring down with small arms, and easily spooked into a stampede like this one. Out of the corner of my eye, I watched them rumble closer through the dirty haze of my window. Made from the twisted combination of dilapidated automobiles and the dark touch of the breach, the autostalkers galloped like water buffalo on all 4 axles, tires turned flat to the earth like circular hooves. Cars and trucks, vans and buses, they all thundered along in a clanking and creaking of old metal, without a driver to be seen in their moldy interiors. Loose stones chipped at their paint, grass clogged in their grills, and the headlights blazed with a furious gleam that bespoke animalistic hysteria. Gotta turn them away from the road. My gaze flicked to the long flatbed trailers that made up our little procession, where the precious cargo from today's raid lay tied down with straps, chains, and rope. Ever since we'd been driven from our home in the new wilderness wildlife reserve by a rocket barrage, all our efforts had become focused on scrounging up tools and equipment to replace what the missiles destroyed. Arc welders, milling machines, metal lathes, anything that could be used to fabricate the wonders of the bygone modern world, we hoarded like gold. This morning had gifted us the Motherlode, a deserted tractor repair shop loaded with all sorts of old-school tooling, non-digital, and perfectly preserved. It took the full day just to get it loaded onto 4 salvaged lowboy trailers, and the well-worn semi-trucks pulling each were too slow to make a clean escape. If the mutants got to us, they might turn us over by sheer force of impact, and the last thing I would hear would be the sounds of my crew dying over the radio, call for backup and stay en route. Snatching my Type 9 submachine gun from its place by my seat, I slapped Charlie on the shoulder and clambered back through the cab of the truck to where a back door opened onto the cargo deck. Wind tore at my face the instant I stepped outside. My brown braid snapped in the breeze like a little flag behind my head, and for a split second, I became frozen in place with a rush of sensations. It had been only a few months since an ill-fated blogging trip brought me to the lost stretches of Barron County, Ohio, but in moments like these, it seemed an eternity. Sometimes, it was hard to believe the normal world I'd grown up in still existed somewhere out there, completely unaware that Ohio once had an 89th county, a missing piece of our world that lay besieged by forces past the scope of our understanding. The mysterious phenomenon known only as the breach had opened sometime long before I'd arrived, only to spew radiation and electromagnetic energy into our world, creating twisted monsters from both natural and man-made sources alike. Under the endless assault, our fragile modern system collapsed, and nearly 3/4 of the civilian population were killed. Since then, the forces of New Wilderness struggled to keep the nightmarish tide at bay, all the while locked in battle with a shadowy organization known as Elsa, who sought to rule the county with an iron fist. Thus, my lazy days of shooting urban exploration footage and checking social media were long gone. Now I carried a submachine gun everywhere I went and led ranger patrols into the overgrown no man's land that used to be normal countryside. It was a world so bizarre I wouldn't have believed it myself, but here I stood, and the memories came flooding back in a cascade of wonder, anger, fear, pain, and determination. Crash, the trailer shuddered under my brown combat boots with a heavy impact, and I blinked to drag myself back into the present, drop the tire shields. Both feet pounded on the deck, and I ran to help the nearest of the crew with the task of lowering the sheet steel plates into position, our steps shaky under the swaying of the trailer. Each iron plate slid into its welded frame with a stout clank, made to guard our precious rubber tires from attack, and brass cartridge casings began to trickle onto the trailer bed as more rangers opened fire. Gunners shuffled back and forth across the crowded deck to ferry ammunition to machine gun mounts bolted onto the armored sides of the trailer, while grenadiers clambered into high perches where they could rain explosives down on the wave of mutants. In the scrap metal parapets along the deckway, riflemen surged to the firing ports to bring their small arms to bear, and I moved to join them, aim for the legs. I racked the hefty bolt on my Type 9 back and flicked the safety off to sight in on the nearest autostocker, a dented green sedan. Hit their legs, drive them back. Brat-tat-tat-tat-tat, the gun bucked in my hands, a familiar experience by this point, and sparks danced across the mutant's sheet metal hide as bullets stitched their way toward its front left leg. Honk, with a displeased bleat of its horn, the sedan veered away from our truck, and the other rangers beside me lowered their aim in similar fashion. One by one, the oncoming freaks shifted their path and soon kept pace alongside us instead of charging into our convoy. Still, I continued to fire with my men, knowing we couldn't stop until the creatures gave up their mad dash. Even for me, the task proved difficult. Curtains of brown mud splashed from the neglected roadway to smear across the trailer, and in the rattling chaos of the drive, it was all I could do to stay upright. The air tasted of damp rain, acidic diesel exhaust, and burned gunpowder, blurred into a solid constant with how fast we were moving. Wham! Our trailer let out an erratic squeal from its rear tires, and I almost fell over, only for my hand to snag the parapet at the last moment. "Lieutenant, there's a big one on your tail." Another of the drivers screamed through the radio headsets many of us wore, electronic communication a vital edge in this kind of ordeal. Indeed, a well-corroded red pickup truck rammed itself into the back of our rig with all the ferocity of an angry bull, one twisted end of its chrome front bumper hooked under our left side tire shield. The mutant rocked to try and shove the larger semi off the dilapidated pavement, rending metal with every thrash. "I've got him." On a raised mount above the trailer bed. One of the other rangers yanked a long spear from a rack bolted next to his position, tugged a small metal pin from its tip, and hurled it down at the mutant. Kaboom! Bits of hot shrapnel whizzed through the air on the heels of the explosion. Wood, glass, and metal shattered to pieces under the grenade lance. A piece hissed by my right ear, and I ducked out of instinct, but the mutated pickup trundled on, still locked in battle with our trailer's back end. Too much weight now rested on our right side tires, and I could taste the salty stench of burnt rubber on the back of my tongue, the brakes beginning to lock up under the strain. The second truck in our convoy backed off to avoid any more shrapnel. But this only slowed them down, and a churning in my guts told me that we'd hit a critical moment. Either we got that pickup off us, or our entire back section could go up in flames, and the convoy with it. I need to get higher. Desperate, I lunged for the rear of our trailer, vaulted over ancient bits of machine tools strapped down in great heaps, and didn't stop until I reached the rear gunner's perch. Each trailer had been outfitted to look like a rolling fort, not the most aerodynamic design, but solid enough to keep mutants from dragging our boys off the deck should we encounter them. Railings of sheet metal, old pipe, and angle iron adorned the ramparts, with small metal towers at the four corners of the trailer to act as perches for our gunners. Grenadiers also shared these posts, giving them a higher field of view to bring their homemade explosives to bear, hence the grenade lances in their various racks. Truth be told, the entire rig looked like something out of a demolition derby for the criminally insane, but it worked, at least, when it wasn't being smashed to pieces by a Rouge autostocker. Anyway, bounding to the foot of the nearest perch, I glanced up in time to see another lance streak downward as the red pickup hurled itself against the armored railing. Boom, an invisible hand seemed to punch me in the chest, and crushed the wind from my lungs. Heat seared my left cheek, and this time I tumbled to the deck along with several others as the shockwave knocked us down like ragdolls. Pain flared in my shoulder, the wild roll across the old trailer stopped by a pile of salvaged tires, and I winced at the Type 9 digging into my ribs. Over the ringing in my ears, I caught the screams of the others in my platoon, as truck number 2 slammed on its brakes to avoid the collision. Creak and dazed, I craned my aching neck upward and gaped in horror. Oh no! Crumpled like a smashed soda can, the gunner's perch sagged toward the roadway, its metal supports ripped apart by the grenade. Most of the few Rangers who'd been atop it jumped to safety on the deck, but one hadn't managed to dismount. I watched in gut-wrenching dread as a skinny figure with red hair that poked out from under her helmet wrapped both arms around the ruined perch with all her strength, her face white with panic. Lucille kicked in frantic efforts to climb onto the lower framework, but the rest of the metal had already begun to give way. The tips of her boots skipped over the road, and both pleading chestnut brown eyes locked with mine. Covering fire. I scrambled toward her on all fours, my voice slipped into a high squeak, and renewed fear coursed through my veins. Guns barked, and bullets sang off the fire-blackened hood of the Chevy as it battered the warped perch from the opposite side, Lucille just out of its reach. With trembling limbs, I flung myself out onto the ruined superstructure and climbed hand over hand down the struts. 13-year-old Lucille Campbell had been one of the many children who I helped escape from the military zone in the city of Black Oak. Her older sister, Andrea, had entrusted Lucille's well-being to me. While not all those I'd led to New Wilderness had become members of 4th Platoon, Lucille practically glued herself to me from day one, and I'd come to think of her like a sister of my own. To see her there, hanging by a fate's thread, made my heart come to a complete stop in my chest. I can't lose her, not like that. How could I look Andrea in the face? How could I look at myself in the mirror? Pull me up, please. Lucille's hands slid on the rusted struts, but each movement only bent the angle iron even more so that her doom inched closer. Hold on. On impulse, I tried to crawl across the ladder to her, but even with my slender frame, it was too much weight on the tattered supports. Just hold on, I'll get you. Stay still. Despite my words, I discovered there was no way I could get to her from the deck. She hung too far out of reach for me to reel her in with a lance pole or a rope, and my mind raced in crazed need for a solution that wouldn't manifest. With tightening lungs, I backed up onto the trailer and cast around for something, anything, to save her. Creak crunch, my mouth fell open, and Lucille's expression sank in despair. The tower struts groaned, and before I could so much as twitch, the weakened structure gave out. No, time slowed, and I couldn't hear my voice calling her name, couldn't feel the wind, smell the burned rubber of the tires, or taste the sour gunpowder residue between my teeth. Lucille tumbled downwards, and the red pickup shoved its way under the falling gunner's perch to ram into the back of the trailer once more. Thud, 2 well-worn boothiels flew into the air, and Lucille hurtled into the moldy bed of the red autostocker, landing so hard I heard her steel helmet thunk off the floor. The mutant seemed to detect something astride its back and writhed like a bucking bronco. Under this assault, the remnants of the gunner's perch tore free, and in the next second the horde of oncoming mutants smashed it flat in a squeal of rattling metal. Like a roller in a pinball machine, Lucille bounced around in the back of the rusty red pickup, her body limp. And the indecisiveness inside me snapped. This is going to hurt, teeth gritted. I backed up a few steps and sprinted at the end of the trailer. Icy wind pushed me into the sky, the pulse roared in my temple, and I soared over the whirling asphalt as the rest of the crew panicked over the radio. Whack, sharp pain blazed through the arches of my feet, and I came down in the peeling metal of the pickup truck's bed, missing the tailgate with my head by a few inches. Its strap tangled against my shoulder, the Type 9 wedged itself against my right armpit in a constrictive knot. Around us the world turned to a sea of melted colors as the rig pulled away, and I tried to right myself. But the beast tossed me from side to side, the rusted steel battering me without mercy. I'm going to die. With a hard jerk, the radio headset swung loose around my neck, my elbow crashed into the corner of the truck bed until the arm went numb, and the herd surrounded us so that I lost sight of the convoy. My lips flooded with the metallic trace of blood, and I wanted to vomit from the constant spinning motion but couldn't for the terror that pulsated through my bloodstream. Please, I don't want to, not yet. Bracing my legs against the cold rails of the truck bed, I managed to snag Lucille by the leather warbelt around her waist and drag the girl to me. She didn't move, blood running from her nose. But neither of us could have done much with the other autostockers slamming the old pickup in their stampede to surge past us. I thumbed a small carabiner on my belt into a loop on hers and did my best to cushion Lucille's head from any further impacts, though my own body took on a terrible beating. For all my efforts, I couldn't reach for either of my guns, or even my knife. Not that it would have helped against the machinery of the autostalker. My mind reeled with a dozen fractured thoughts, and for a brief moment, Chris's loving smile flashed before my eyes. I didn't even get to say goodbye. Under my bruised spine, the pickup rattled over thick underbrush, and a wall of dripping evergreen trees closed in. Wham! Something hit the beast squarely in the middle, the rusty sheet metal crumpled, and the autostalker tumbled end over end to bury us both in darkness.